You probably know Alberta for its Rocky Mountains, its prairies that stretch to the horizon, and the oil industry that built modern cities. But there's a forgotten side of Alberta that most people never see. A side hidden beneath glacial valleys, erased by boreal forest, and buried under layers of time and silence. Scattered across this province are ancient structures, medicine wheels carved into mountainsides, stone circles in remote grasslands, petroglyphs that no one can quite date, ceremonial sites that predate recorded history by centuries, and ruins that raise questions we still can't answer. In this video, we are uncovering 10 of Alberta's most mysterious and unexplained ancient structures that archaeologists, historians, and Indigenous elders still debate today. Some of these places have been standing for over 1,000 years. Others may be far older, and we still don't know who built them, why they built them, or what they meant. So stay with me to the end, because number 1 is a site so enigmatic that it sparked decades of scientific controversy. So hit subscribe, and let's begin. Number 10. The Majorville Medicine Wheel. If you drive south from Calgary toward the American border, passing through ranching country where the prairie rolls in gentle waves beneath an enormous sky, you eventually reach a stretch of grassland near the Milk River, where the wind never quite stops blowing. On a ridge overlooking this high prairie stands an arrangement of stones that has confused and captivated people for over 100 years. The Majorville Medicine Wheel lies before you like a great stone calendar, its rocks bleached pale by centuries of weather, arranged in a perfect circle with spokes radiating outward like the rays of a frozen sun. The structure consists of a central cairn roughly 4 meters across, surrounded by a circle of stones about 26 meters in diameter, with 28 spokes extending outward. It's the largest medicine wheel in Alberta, and one of the largest in all of North America. But this wasn't always a place of reverence and careful study. When settlers first arrived in the region in the 1880s, they had no understanding of what the wheel meant or why it had been built. Some thought it was a natural curiosity, a trick of glacial geology. Others dismissed it as meaningless, just rocks piled by Indians in a random pattern. The wheel was already ancient then. Local Blackfoot people said it had been there for as long as anyone could remember, possibly dating back 1,000 years or more. Archaeologists now suggest it could have been constructed any time between 2,000 and 4,500 years ago, aligned to mark the summer solstice and the rising of certain stars. It was a calendar, a ceremonial center, a sacred gathering place. It was a map written in stone on the prairie, used to track the movements of the seasons and the stars. But in the early 20th century, something changed. The structure fell into disrepair. Stones were moved or removed by collectors, curiosity seekers, and people who didn't understand its significance. By the 1970s, archaeologists realized that Majorville was being lost, slowly dismantled by neglect and theft. The wheel that had survived millennia was being erased by people who simply didn't know what they possessed. It took decades of work by researchers and Blackfoot cultural keepers to document, preserve, and restore the site to something approaching its original configuration. Today, the Majorville Medicine Wheel stands as a reminder of ancient Indigenous astronomical knowledge, preserved not by chance but by people who fought to keep it alive. But many stones remain missing. No one will ever know their exact placement, and questions still linger. How many medicine wheels like this once existed across Alberta? How many have been destroyed or lost to time? The prairie keeps its secrets. Number 9. The Windy Point Petroglyphs. In the foothills west of Calgary, where the prairie begins to rise and the evergreen forest starts to thicken, there exists a cliff face of red and brown sandstone that has been covered in images for over 2,000 years. The Windy Point petroglyphs sit on a rock outcropping overlooking the Elbow River, a place where Indigenous people gathered for millennia, hunting, trading, and leaving their mark on stone. Today, if you approach the site carefully, because it is fragile, because it is sacred to many, you see dozens of figures carved into the rock, handprints, animals, humanoid shapes, symbols that scholars have spent decades trying to interpret. Some figures are simple outlines, others are deeply incised, carved with patient precision into the hard stone. The designs include representations of bighorn sheep, bison, horses, humans with raised arms, and abstract patterns whose meanings have been lost to time. When European fur traders and settlers first encountered these petroglyphs in the early 1800s, they had no context for understanding them. They were curiosities, mysterious marks left by people who had vanished or been pushed aside. Some settlers carved their own names over the ancient images, not understanding they were destroying something irreplaceable. The carvings range in age from perhaps 500 years old to over 2,000 years old, but many are impossible to date precisely. The style suggests they were made by ancestors of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Kainai, the Blood Tribe, and other indigenous peoples whose territories included this region. The figures tell stories, hunting scenes, spiritual visions, astronomical markers, records of significant events. But most of the stories are gone. The people who made the carvings are long dead, and the oral traditions that explain their meaning were disrupted, suppressed, and nearly erased by colonization. In recent decades, indigenous communities have reclaimed stewardship of Windy Point. They have worked with archaeologists and geologists to protect the site, to limit public access in order to prevent further damage from the hands and eyes of too many visitors. But damage has already occurred. Some carvings are fading, worn away by wind and water and the hands of people who didn't know or didn't care. You can still see faint outlines of figures where modern names are carved over them, a palimpsest of history with contemporary vandalism obscuring ancient meaning. Today, Windy Point stands as both a window into a distant past and a record of how that past has been treated. Carefully preserved in some places, carelessly destroyed in others. The cliff still holds its mysteries. Many petroglyphs remain uninterpreted, their meanings known only in fragments through oral traditions that survived colonization. Number 8. The writing on stone petroglyphs. Move further south, toward the Montana border, and the landscape transforms into something stranger. Badlands carved by water, coulées cut deep into earth, rock formations that seem to defy explanation in their shapes and colors. In the Milk River Valley, at a place called Anishinaabe by the Blackfoot people, meaning where people wrote, there exists one of the densest concentrations of petroglyphs in North America. The site comprises over 1,500 carved images spread across multiple rock faces, some at ground level, others high up on cliff walls, created over a span of perhaps 3,000 years. Today, if you stand at writing on stone, you are surrounded by ancient voices, handprints and horse tracks, shield bearers and warriors, animals rendered in profile with careful attention to detail. The rock faces are a visual chronicle, a record of ceremony, hunting, vision quests, and spiritual experiences that indigenous people documented in stone. The images span a range of styles and techniques. Some were carved by striking stone tools against stone, percussion techniques that produced deep, dramatic grooves. Others were incised with sharp implements, creating fine lines that catch the light in certain ways. Some figures are representational, clearly depicting animals or people. Others are abstract, geometric, their meanings obscured by time and the loss of the cultural knowledge they once conveyed. The site was continuously used for over 3,000 years, with different peoples adding their marks, their prayers, their records. It was a sacred space, a gathering place, a canvas for spiritual expression. When the Blackfoot people's way of life changed due to the coming of the horse and then the pressure of settler colonization, the practice of adding new petroglyphs gradually ceased. By the late 1800s, the site had become a historical remnant, a text no longer being written. In the 1880s and 1890s, when fur traders and ranchers encountered writing on stone, they were baffled. Some collected pieces of carved rock as souvenirs. Others carved their own names and dates into the stone, not realizing they were writing over thousands of years of indigenous history. Archaeologists have documented which carvings are modern vandalism and which are ancient, but the damage is permanent. Some of the older petroglyphs were hammered off the cliff faces by collectors. Others have been worn by rain, wind, and frost. Yet despite the damage, the site remains overwhelming in its density and power. When you walk among these rocks, surrounded by thousands of ancient handprints and images, you feel the weight of centuries. Today, writing on stone is protected as a provincial historic area, managed in partnership with indigenous communities. But many questions remain unanswered. Which specific peoples created which carvings? What ceremonies took place here? What spiritual or practical purposes did this site serve across its 3,000-year history? The stones refuse to tell us everything. Number 7. The Old Man River Medicine Wheels. East of the Rocky Mountains, where the foothills give way to rolling prairie, there exists a cluster of structures that few people know about. Across a stretch of grassland near the Old Man River, several medicine wheels have been documented by archaeologists and Blackfoot knowledge keepers. These are smaller than Majorville, less famous, less visited, and therefore less damaged by tourism and time. but they are no less mysterious. The wheels range in size from about 5 meters to 15 meters in diameter. Each one contains a central cairn and radiating spokes, aligned to astronomical events: the summer solstice sunrise, the rising of Sirius, the movements of Venus across the sky. These were star maps, ceremonial grounds, places where shamans or elders gathered to mark time, to conduct vision quests, to connect the human world with the celestial world above. When were they built? No one knows precisely. The rock arrangement reveals no organic material that carbon dating can analyze. Based on style and structure, researchers estimate they date somewhere between 800 and 4,000 years ago. But that is a huge range. The wheels could be 1,000 years old or 4 times that age. And did one person or family build them all, or different groups at different times? We don't know. Local Blackfoot communities have oral traditions about these sites, but much of the detailed knowledge was disrupted by colonization, residential schools, and the systematic suppression of Indigenous culture. Elders today work with archaeologists to piece together meaning from fragments, combining oral history, archaeological evidence, and living knowledge to understand what these structures meant and how they were used. Today, if you visit the Old Man River wheels, if you can find them, as they are not widely publicized and access requires local knowledge, you see structures that appear remarkably intact compared to Majorville. Some have been restored by Indigenous communities and researchers. Others remain in their original configuration. Standing in the center of one of these wheels, looking outward at the spokes radiating to the horizon, you feel the deliberateness of the design. Someone, centuries ago, placed each stone with purpose. Someone looked at the stars and the seasons and decided to mark that knowledge in rock and earth. But the voices that explain the wheels are mostly gone, replaced by academic theories and fragments of surviving oral tradition. The structures stand as monuments to knowledge that was nearly lost entirely. Number 6. The Athabasca Sand Dunes Petroglyphs. Far north, in the boreal forest of northern Alberta, where the landscape opens into vast lakes and sandy expanses, there exists a place that seems too remote to hold secrets of ancient human presence. The Athabasca Sand Dunes stretch across nearly 100,000 hectares of shifting sand, forest, and interconnected lakes. It is a landscape of silence and isolation. Yet here, on rock outcroppings and boulder surfaces, ancient petroglyphs have been found, suggesting that people journeyed to this remote place thousands of years ago. The images include hand stencils, animal figures, and geometric patterns carved into the rock. But because the site is so remote and access is difficult, research is limited. Few archaeologists have studied these petroglyphs in depth. Few people have even heard of them. The sand dunes themselves are geologically young, but the rock beneath them is ancient. People traveling through this region during different periods of history would have encountered the same rock faces that still stand today. Perhaps they stopped to rest and left their marks. Perhaps they were conducting spiritual journeys, vision quests through wilderness, marking sacred sites. Perhaps they were hunters pursuing caribou or moose across this open landscape. We simply don't know. The remoteness of the site has protected it from casual vandalism and heavy tourism, but it has also meant that the petroglyphs remain largely undocumented and understudied. Archaeological resources are finite. There is no funding for extensive surveys of remote sites, so the Athabasca Sand Dunes petroglyphs remain largely mysterious, their meanings unknown, their age uncertain, their cultural significance understood only by the Indigenous communities whose ancestors may have left them. Today, if you were to travel to the Athabasca Sand Dunes, a journey that requires access by boat across glacial lakes, you might encounter these ancient images. You might stand alone in the boreal forest, looking at handprints left by someone 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, knowing almost nothing about who left them or why. It is a humbling experience to confront ancient human presence in a place so remote and seemingly untouched. But the remoteness is itself an accident of history. In different times, perhaps, this landscape was more populated, more traveled, more culturally significant than it is today. The shifts in trade routes, the arrival of horses, the pressures of European colonization, all of these changed where people lived and traveled. So these petroglyphs stand as reminders of a time when this remote place was part of a human landscape, connected to larger networks of movement and meaning. Number 5. The Buffalo Jump Medicine Walls. In the foothills south of Calgary, where the landscape becomes increasingly vertical, jagged with limestone cliffs and deep gorges, there exists a site that has yielded some of the most mysterious stone structures in all of Alberta. The buffalo jumps of the region are well known, places where, for thousands of years, indigenous hunters drove herds of bison over cliffs, providing food for thousands of people. But surrounding some of these jumps, integrated into the landscape in ways that are not yet fully understood, are carefully arranged stone walls and structures. Some archaeologists believe these were used to funnel animals toward the jump. Others think they served ceremonial purposes. Some may have marked territorial boundaries, and some may have had meanings we have no framework for understanding. These walls were built by hand, stone by stone, without mortar, using the natural rock of the landscape to create patterns and lines that extend across terrain. Dating them is extremely difficult, because stone structures leave no organic material for carbon dating. Based on analysis of tool marks and comparison with other known sites, researchers estimate the walls date somewhere between 3,500 and 8,000 years ago. But that is a massive range of uncertainty. The walls could predate the Roman Empire, or they could be relatively recent, only 1,000 years old. Archaeological surveys have been incomplete, so we don't know how extensive these wall systems once were, how many have been destroyed by erosion, by modern development, by people who simply didn't recognize them as significant. We don't know. What we do know is that someone spent enormous time and effort building these structures. The labor required to place hundreds or thousands of stones in specific patterns across difficult terrain is immense. This was not something done casually or for a single purpose. The walls represented investment of community resources, coordination among multiple people, planning that extended across seasons or years. The structures embody intention and meaning. But what meaning? When you stand near one of these walls today, running your hand along stonework that has survived millennia of weather and erosion, you feel the presence of intention. You sense that this was important. But without the cultural knowledge that explained these structures to the people who built them, without the oral traditions that survived, we are left guessing. The walls keep their secrets, and the meaning that they once held is largely lost. Number 4. The Clearwater River stone arrangements. In the boreal forest region east of Slave Lake, where the Clearwater River cuts through dense coniferous forest, Indigenous archaeologists have documented unusual stone arrangements that don't fit standard categories. The arrangements consist of stones placed in specific patterns, lines, circles, and geometric configurations, on the ground and on rock faces. Unlike medicine wheels, which are well known and have been extensively studied, these Clearwater River structures have received comparatively little attention from academic archaeology. But Indigenous researchers and knowledge keepers have been working to understand their significance, combining archaeological survey work with oral traditions and ecological knowledge. Some of the arrangements appear to mark astronomical alignments, others seem to indicate movement corridors or territorial markers. Some may have been vision quest sites where individuals underwent spiritual journeys. The structures range in age, some may be 500 years old, others possibly much older. The remote location has protected them from heavy tourism and casual vandalism, but it has also meant that systematic research is limited. The boreal forest itself is difficult terrain for archaeology. Vegetation overgrows sites rapidly. Frost heave moves and displaces stones. The forest is alive and restless, constantly reshaping the landscape. Finding and studying stone structures in this environment requires dedicated effort, funding, and expertise. Many structures likely remain completely unknown to science, hidden in the forest, known only to people traveling through or living in the region. Today, the Clearwater River structures remain largely mysterious. They are studied by a small number of researchers and Indigenous knowledge keepers, but they have not received the attention or funding that sites like Majorville have received. This itself is a kind of erasure, not the destruction of the structures themselves, but the invisibility of their significance. They remain standing, in the forest, but largely unwitnessed, unstudied, their meanings not widely understood. For researchers interested in ancient Alberta, these sites represent frontier territory, places where knowledge is still being developed, where Indigenous and academic ways of knowing are being brought into conversation, where mysteries remain genuinely open to interpretation and new understanding. Number 3. The Drumheller Valley Ceremonial Cairns. In the Badlands south of Drumheller, where the earth reveals layers of geologic time in brilliant bands of color, reds, greens, purples, grays, there exists a landscape that has been inhabited and used by Indigenous peoples for at least 8,000 years. Within this landscape are scattered numerous stone cairns, some large enough to contain multiple chambers, others small piles marking specific locations. These are not burial mounds in the traditional sense. though some may have contained human remains. They are ceremonial structures, markers, gathering places, storage facilities. The range of their purposes and meanings is still being understood through the combined work of archaeologists and indigenous communities. The Drumheller Valley has seen dramatic environmental changes over the centuries. The climate has shifted, vegetation patterns have changed, the river has moved. During periods of greater moisture, the region supported larger populations. During dry periods, population declined. The ceremonial cairns may have marked these transitions, served as gathering places during times of plenty, held spiritual significance during periods of scarcity. Some cairns are clearly ancient, their construction style matching artifacts from archaeological sites dated to 3,000 years ago or more. Others appear more recent, possibly constructed within the last 500 years. What makes Drumheller particularly significant is that the site is still active in indigenous spiritual practice. The cairns are not just archaeological curiosities to be studied and shelved. They are living places of spiritual importance, still visited by people engaging in ceremonies, still central to indigenous connection with the land. This complicates the archaeology, because the site cannot be treated as a dead artifact. It is living heritage, and it must be understood in partnership with indigenous communities who maintain relationships with the place. The result is a richer understanding of the site, one that combines scientific analysis with spiritual knowledge, creating a more complete picture than either approach alone could produce. Today, if you visit the Drumheller Valley, you might encounter these cairns. They blend into the landscape, easy to miss if you don't know what to look for. But once you understand what they are, once you recognize them as deliberate human construction rather than natural rock formations, you begin to see the landscape differently. You see not wilderness but cultural landscape, a place that has been carefully tended, marked, and used by people for thousands of years. The badlands themselves have been wearing away through erosion for millennia. Cairns that stood on ridges have been undermined and toppled. Others have been buried by shifting earth. The landscape is slowly erasing the human presence, even as new cairns continue to be placed and used in traditional practices. Time and geology are reclaiming the land. Number 2. The Whaleback Ridge alignments. On a ridge northwest of Lethbridge, in a landscape of low mountains and rolling grassland, there exists a series of stone alignments that have perplexed archaeologists for decades. Called the Whaleback Ridge structures, they consist of stones arranged in long lines that extend across the landscape for hundreds of meters. Some researchers believe they mark astronomical alignments, indicating specific sunrise or sunset positions for important dates in the calendar. Others think they may have been used to funnel or direct animal movement. Still others suggest they were territorial markers or routes of travel. The true purpose remains unclear. The stones were arranged with remarkable precision, considering the tools available to the people who built them. Many show careful selection, larger stones for the major lines, smaller stones for details. The structures were not haphazard but planned, engineered, intentionally constructed. Yet because they are so subtle, blending into the landscape, they were not seriously studied by archaeologists until the late 20th century. By that time, some had been damaged by modern ranching activities, stone removal, and natural erosion. How many alignments once existed that have been completely destroyed? We don't know. Dating the structures is nearly impossible without organic material for carbon dating. Based on architectural style and comparison with similar sites, researchers estimate the alignments date somewhere between 500 and 4,000 years ago. But this is informed guessing, not certain knowledge. And the meaning of the structures, if they had meaning beyond practical function, is completely unknown. The people who built them either left no oral tradition explaining their purpose, or that tradition was lost during colonization. So the alignments stand on the ridge, visible only to people who know where to look, their purpose debated among a small community of researchers, and largely unknown to the general public. The grassland grows around them, slowly obscuring them, and with each passing decade, they fade further into history and mystery. But the most significant mystery is not about Whaleback Ridge itself. The mystery is about how many similar structures once existed across Alberta that have now been completely erased or hidden. Archaeologists survey only a fraction of the landscape. Many sites have been destroyed by development. Others remain undocumented, unknown to anyone but local indigenous communities, and perhaps a handful of researchers. The Whaleback Ridge alignments represent only what we have managed to record and preserve. They are the visible fraction of something much larger that we no longer have access to. Standing on the ridge, looking at the stone lines stretching toward the horizon, You are confronted with the limits of our knowledge. We see these structures and wonder, but we are missing context. We are missing the voices of the people who built them. We are looking at the end of a story without access to most of the narrative. Number 1. The Bluestone Astronomical Complex. In the mountains west of Pincher Creek, at an elevation of over 2,000 meters, on a ridge surrounded by peaks and glacial valleys, there exists a structure, or complex of structures, that may be the most significant and least understood ancient site in all of Alberta. Called the Bluestone Astronomical Complex by the small number of researchers who know about it, the site consists of carefully positioned stone markers arranged across a landscape that commands views of the entire valley and surrounding mountains. Some stones are placed in ways that align precisely with the sunrise on the summer solstice. Others align with the midwinter sunrise. Others mark the rising positions of specific stars, Sirius, Polaris, major constellations. The arrangement suggests sophisticated astronomical knowledge, the kind of understanding that would require centuries of observation, record-keeping, and transmission of knowledge across generations. The site is difficult to access, located in high-elevation terrain that is snow-covered much of the year. Few people have visited it. Few archaeologists have studied it seriously. The remoteness has protected it from casual vandalism and tourism, but it has also meant that research is limited. No systematic excavation has been conducted. The exact date of construction is unknown, estimated somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 years ago based on architectural style in comparison with other known sites. But there is enormous uncertainty in that estimate. What makes Bluestone particularly significant is what it suggests about the people who built it. To create such an astronomically sophisticated structure required sustained intellectual effort. It required knowledge of mathematics, geometry, and astronomy. It required ability to plan across generations, to maintain and transmit information, to organize labor and resources. This was not a simple or primitive people. This was a culture with sophisticated knowledge systems, with capability for abstract thought and long-term planning. And yet this culture has left almost no other trace in the archaeological record of the region. There are no large settlements nearby. There are no artifact scatters suggesting permanent habitation. There are almost no other structures that obviously relate to Bluestone. It is isolated, enigmatic, standing alone as evidence of a presence that otherwise left no mark. This raises profound questions. Who were the people who built Bluestone? Where did they go? Did they represent a seasonal gathering place for people who lived elsewhere? Was it a ceremonial center visited by pilgrims from across a vast region? Was it constructed by a culture that was later displaced, their presence erased from the archaeological record by subsequent peoples? Did environmental change force the abandonment of sites like this, pushing populations to locations where they left more visible traces? Was this a unique culture, or one of many similar astronomical sites that once existed across the province? Today, Bluestone remains largely unknown. It is not protected as a provincial site. It is not heavily studied. A small number of Indigenous researchers, archaeologists, and knowledge keepers know about it, but it has not entered public consciousness or scientific prominence. This itself is mysterious. Why is a structure of such apparent sophistication so obscure? The answer is partly geographic isolation and partly institutional politics. Limited funding for research on remote sites, the challenge of accessing high-elevation terrain, the difficulty of dating stone structures without excavation. But it is also because the site challenges certain assumptions about pre-colonial North America. It suggests knowledge systems and capabilities that complicate simple narratives about Indigenous peoples. Standing at Bluestone in the thin air and intense sunlight of high elevation, surrounded by mountains and sky, looking at stones arranged with such deliberateness and precision, you confront the limits of what we know about Alberta's ancient past. The stones are silent. They reveal their astronomical alignments to anyone who looks closely, but they refuse to explain themselves. We can measure them, analyze them, debate their meanings, but the voices that could tell us the true story, the knowledge keepers of the culture that built them, the elders who understood the system, the people who maintained the site across generations, those voices are gone, silenced by distance and time and colonization. And that may be the most profound mystery of all. Not what Bluestone is, but what we have lost in not knowing it. How many sites like Bluestone once existed across Alberta, each holding sophisticated knowledge, each marking the presence of a complex culture? How many have been completely destroyed, leaving no trace at all? We live in a landscape that has been shaped by human presence for thousands of years, yet we see it as wild, as untouched, as a blank space waiting to be developed. But every valley held stories. Every ridge was named. Every mountain pass was traveled. The landscape we see is not wilderness. It is a world that was known intimately by people whose names we have forgotten, whose knowledge systems we have dismantled, whose presence we have tried to erase. Bluestone stands as a reminder. The ancient structures scattered across Alberta, the medicine wheels and stone alignments, the petroglyphs and ceremonial cairns, the complex arrangements of stones on remote ridges, they are all reminders that this land was understood, was used, was cherished by people whose presence is still written in stone. And as long as those stones remain standing, the possibility of understanding persists. The knowledge is gone, but the evidence remains. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps the stones themselves, even silent, even mysterious, are sufficient testimony to cultures and knowledge systems that deserve to be remembered, to be honored, to be understood as fully and carefully as we can manage. I hope you have enjoyed this exploration of Alberta's ancient mysteries. Make sure to share this video with your friends who love history and hidden places, and I'll see you in the next video.